traveled to the Del Rio sector of Texas. That's where I spoke to a woman who shared her story with me. She had been sex trafficked by the cartels starting at the age of 12. This is the United States of America, and it is past time, in my opinion, that we start acting on it.
The question is about the timing and the implication of you telling the story. The New York Times has this. Right. None of this happened during President Biden's administration, but that didn't stop the first-term senator from strongly implying that the president could have somehow prevented it from happening.
So I didn't say a teenager. I didn't say a young woman, a grown woman, a woman when she was trafficked when she was 12.
I was a victim, it seems to me, starting in 2004. I arrived in Mexico City in 2008 when I was already a survivor.
Were you ever trafficked in the United States?
No, para nada. Not at all, no. I was a victim here in Mexico.
So that was obviously super weird for a range of reasons, a little alarming at times, but it was also incredibly misleading. So all in all, a super weird speech with at least one very misleading part about immigration. Sound familiar? It should, because it's a page out of Trump's playbook.
I am shocked. Shocked. Well, not that shocked.
I mean, sure, Emma Stone was good, but this actress, I believe, was robbed at the Oscars.
President Biden's border policies are a disgrace. This crisis is despicable. And the truth is, it is almost entirely preventable.
Was her talk on the border. And just to contextualize that, she was one of the U.S. senators who was involved in the bipartisan negotiations to create a border bill. And she helped create the bill and then voted against it when Donald Trump called on Republicans to pull the plug on the bill that they themselves had negotiated.
Now, sure, Alabama Senator Katie Britt has had her feet held to the kitchen stove since her ghastly rebuttal of Biden's State of the Union address. I mean, it was so bad that the furthest of far-right talking heads couldn't quite stomach it.
May God bless you, and may God continue to bless these United States of America.
I'm sure she's
I'm a fan of her.
I'm sure she's very nice.
She embarrassed herself. She embarrassed the Republicans, and she embarrassed women. It was a disgrace. I was horrified by her performance, and I really think that it's going to take her years to rebound.
Again, it did offer a segue to one of the greatest SNL impersonations of my time, in my humble opinion.
I'll be performing an original monologue called "This Country is Hell." You see, I'm not just a senator. I'm a wife, a mother, and the craziest bitch in the Target parking lot.
But on a more serious note, she didn't just fearmonger in a hushed, horror-like voice. She blatantly lied and misled those cocooned off from reality that was the target of said misinformation.
I traveled to the Del Rio sector of Texas. That's where I spoke to a woman who shared her story with me. She had been sex trafficked by the cartels starting at the age of 12. She told me not just that she was raped every day, but how many times a day she was raped. We wouldn't be okay with this happening in a third world country. This is the United States of America, and it is past time, in my opinion, that we start acting like it. President Biden's border policies are a disgrace.
To be clear, the story that you relayed is not something that's happened under the Biden administration, that particular person.
Well, I very clearly said I spoke to a woman who told me about when she was trafficked when she was 12. So I didn't say a teenager. I didn't say a young woman, a grown woman, a woman when she was trafficked when she was 12.
Well, at this moment, I would like her to get informed a little more about the topic, and that at some point, if she wants to contact me to talk about the topic, she can do so. She can also contact people who have really gone through what she says.
And as Jen Psaki pointed out in her segment this past weekend, sure, we can all have a laugh at how blatantly staged it was, but let's not look past how dangerous these lies are, especially when they're hidden amidst the absurdity of all this.
So that was obviously super weird for a range of reasons, a little alarming at times, but it was also incredibly misleading. I mean, during that speech, Britt shared a graphic story about a woman who had told her about being sexually abused over and over by members of Mexican drug cartels. She implied it happened in the United States, and she told that story in an effort purposefully to criticize the Biden administration's border policy. But An independent reporter named Jonathan Katz did a little digging, and what he discovered has gone viral on TikTok for good reason. For one, he found that the victim had shared her story many times, not just to Katie Britt privately, including to Congress back in 2015. And the horrific ads she talks about actually took place in Mexico. And they happened when George W. Bush was president. So all in all, a super weird speech with at least one very misleading part about immigration. Sound familiar? It should, because it's a page out of Trump's playbook. Look, some Republican members of Congress basically entered the political world looking and acting like this. They ran as full-throated MAGA fanatics without even the pretense of waiting to govern. They didn't evolve. For others, like Troy Nehls and Katie Britt, there's been a bit of an evolution. And that tells us something important. Because even when you're elected as more of a mainstream conservative, like Troy Nehls and Katie Britt, and there are many others, there is no incentive to stay that way because the MAGA movement is no longer the fringe. It is the Republican Party. And in order to stay in office and rise through the ranks, you have no choice but to go full MAGA.
And after the video spread like wildfire across the internet, it has to be said that the majority of the discourse revolved around her terrible acting and blatant change of tone in her voice. But journalist Jonathan Katz took a closer look at the gross lies that plagued her melodramatic monologue.
So you have no doubt seen this woman on your For You page at various points today. That is Senator Katie Britt, the junior senator from the state of Alabama, who delivered the Republican response to Joe Biden's State of the Union last night. It was weird, but the part that was the weirdest for me, the part that was the most off, was this.
When I took office, I took a different approach. I traveled to the Del Rio sector of Texas. That's where I spoke to a woman who shared her story with me. She had been sex trafficked by the cartels starting at the age of 12.
So I immediately had questions. Who was this woman? How did she meet her? How did she get her to tell her this story? Also, she seems to be describing something that had happened over the process of years. She said that it started when this woman was 12, and she says that she's a woman now, so it seems that some time has passed. How much of this happened on the border? What country did it happen in? Did it happen before Joe Biden was president? Senator Britt, right after that, stated pretty directly what side of the border it happened on, or at least she implies it very strongly.
And we wouldn't be okay with this happening in a third world country. This is the United States of America.
All right, so there's the answer. It happened in the United States. Or did it? So I looked a little bit to see if I could figure out what Senator Britt was talking about here. And I found it pretty easily. But this didn't happen when Joe Biden was president. It happened 20 years ago when George W. Bush, a Republican, was president. And Jacinto Romero didn't share her story with Senator Britt. Britt tells it like she's like sitting by the banks of the Rio Grande, like holding her hand, like getting her to tell her the story that she won't tell anyone else. I mean, that's sort of the affect that you get watching that video, right? This is a professional activist. I mean, I'm sure she went through the things that she went through. I'm not discounting that at all. And she's clearly a very brave person who has overcome a lot in her life. But she tells this story in public. This is her testifying in front of Congress in 2015, 9 years ago, almost a decade ago. This is what she does. She goes around and tells people this story. And she did it for the senators in January 2023. It goes beyond misleading. She said it in the piece of the video that you saw before. She says, we wouldn't accept these things if they happened in a third world country. Well, they did.
And this is the crux of it. The youngest Republican woman ever elected to Senate, and the first from Alabama to note, donning a crucifix pendant hanging from her necklace, willfully misleading voters to score political points. It is indicative of this very party that claimed to uphold family values and the sanctity of life while doing and voting against everything that not only helps preserve life, say Social Security and Medicare.
One last question.
Go ahead.
Entitlements ever be on your plate?
At some point they will be. We have tremendous growth. We're going to have tremendous growth. This next year, it'll be toward the end of the year. The growth is going to be incredible. And at the right time, we will take a look at that. You know, that's actually the easiest of all things, if you look, because it's such a big percentage.
To do some of
if you don't cut something in entitlements, you'll never really deal with the debt.
We'll be cutting, but we're also going to have growth like you've never had before.
You changed your your outlook on how to handle entitlements, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, Mr. President? It seems like something has to be done, or else we're going to be stuck at 120% of debt to GDP forever.
So first of all, there is a lot you can do in terms of entitlements, in terms of cutting.
But supports it like IVF. I mean, they don't even know what they stand for at this point.
A lot of these men in Congress don't understand what IVF is.
We need to have more kids. We need to have an opportunity to do that. And I thought this was the right thing to do. But
IVF is used to have more children. And right now, IVF services are paused at some of the clinics in Alabama. Aren't you concerned that this could impact people who are trying to have kids?
Well, that's for another conversation.
They've gotten themselves into this weird place on it, but they've been pushing that. They've also been pushing and sponsoring a bill banning mifepristone as well. I mean, they are actively pushing bans on a range of contraception and means of women making choices about their own bodies. It's not changed in Congress. To your point, they're continuing to push it forward.
Let's all enjoy the comedic relief of ScarJo's impersonation. Yes, I certainly did. But also let's take a deeper dive at the disinformation Republicans tried to Trojan horse into homes via people like Mrs. Meisner 101.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Meidas by signing up to the MeidasTouch newsletter at MeidasTouch.com/newsletter.